Hi, and welcome to the Tripwire Fireside Chats. I am Chris Jurney, Head of Developer Strategy for Games at Oculus. I have spent a lot of time with our two guests here from Tripwire Interactive during the development of their new game, Killing Floor Incursion. And today we will be talking about their experience moving from traditional games into VR and what they learned shipping a high-quality first-person shooter. So let's bring them up. First, we are going to meet John Gibson. So in 2005, John co-founded Tripwire Interactive with other former members of the Red Orchestra mod team. Today, as president of Tripwire, he leads a talented team of developers creating hit games such as Killing Floor 2 and Rising Storm 2 Vietnam, and he is expanding the frontiers of VR with titles such as Killing Floor Incursion. Tripwire's games regularly appear in lists of top PC games of all time, and John leads the company, but still finds time for programming and worked on gameplay and AI for Killing Floor Incursion. John Gibson. Have a seat, sir. All right. Next up is Leland Scalli. So as one of Tripwire's earliest employees, Leland has been a key contributor in all of the company's games, including Red Orchestra 1 and 2, and Killing Floor 1 and 2. He started as an art contractor on the original Red Orchestra in 2005. Then he became full-time and worked his way up to environmental art lead. His passion for VR led him to spearhead Tripwire's VR efforts, and he became the game director on Killing Floor Incursion. And as game director, he was involved in all aspects of Incursion, including design, art, story, gameplay, and more. Leland Scalli. Welcome, sirs.
Yep.
So John, you are welcome. John, let's start with a little history for context. Can you give us a quick timeline of Tripwire?
Yeah, so Tripwire started out actually as a mod team in about 2002. We were working on a mod called Red Orchestra for the $1 million Make Something Unreal contest. I'm going to spoil it for you, we won. Although we never did see that $1 million, I still get asked about it occasionally. What did we do with that $1 million? Yeah, so mod team, and then we started making commercial games after we won the contest. We did Red Orchestra Ostfront, then we did Killing Floor, Red Orchestra 2, Killing Floor 2, Rising Storm 2, and then we decided to get into VR.
Nice. So now you have shipped Killing Floor Incursion in August. How did that project come about? Like, how do you switch from being, a Steam darling to being a virtual reality developer?
So in December 2015, Tripwire held a game jam as people were leaving for holiday. And the theme was create something, a new game mode for Killing Floor 2. I was leading the environment department at the time, and we kind of didn't know what to do. We figured we could make another level, but we just needed something to work on. So in my spare time, I had been making VR stuff in UE4 at home with the DK2, and pitched that, like, hey, we should make a VR thing. So after 3 weeks, we had something that we let the company play. It was like an escape the mansion, survival horror kind of game, and it made everybody sick, and it was awful. Free move was the default,
and you're off to the races.
Yeah, and it was hard to get anyone to try to play a VR game after that.
The heady days of 2014.
Yeah, so yeah, after that, John had received a CV1 and the touch prototypes. He went home, got that set up, and we kind of just scrapped everything we had, and in our spare time for about 4 or 5 months outside of work, we put something else together, and we're like, we're going to make a shooter. We're going to do the thing we actually want to do. And we eventually showed it to you guys at Oculus, and you said, yes, make this thing. And we're like, okay.
Nice.
And then it became official.
So John, why did you want to pursue the game? Like, why was it interesting for the company as opposed to Leland?
Well, we had the opportunity to try out some of the early touch prototypes. And we saw things like Dead and Buried, and we thought, wow, if we could make some really awesome shooting mechanics in VR, and then apply that to the Killing Floor universe, we thought that would be really, really fun. And the entire team, when we presented to the team, everyone was just so excited, like, yes, let's make Killing Floor in VR. And we felt like there were so many things that hadn't been done yet. It was like unexplored territory. So it was just something really exciting for the team.
Nice. So you guys brought some footage of early development. So let's take a look, and I'll let you guys talk over it.
Yeah, so when we first started, we wanted to get a core gameplay loop together. So we just created this box room. We created a couple of weapons, and then we put one type of monster in there. And then we just iterated on that until it was very fun. And we really weren't sure, you know, you think about this, it seems silly now that, hey, shooting zombies in VR, is that going to be fun? But it seems silly to ask that now, but at the time, nobody knew. Yeah. So we tried it, it was really, really fun, and we said, once we had that core gameplay loop, we said, let's make a game around this.
Yeah. Nice. Nice. All right, so you guys have a lot of experience and success in multiplayer shooters on PC. Let's talk about how that did or did not help making Incursion. So Leland, early in development, I know you tried making everything in Incursion as sort of physical and realistic as possible. How did that work out?
Sort of good, sort of not good. One of the first things we tried was making every action in the game fully realized. So the act of reloading, we made the character explore the environment, pick up single magazines, put them in a little pouch, and then when they wanted to reload, they had to hit a mag release button, take a magazine out of the pouch, put it in the gun, and then that was engaging and exciting when you were fighting like 3 enemies. As soon as it was a horde of enemies, that became extremely frustrating. And John always pointed out, like, you can't feel like Neo in the Matrix dual wielding when you have to pull out a gun, hit the mag release, pull out the magazine, put it in, put that gun away, pull out the other gun, take out the magazine, put that in, put that away. And then by the time you get to shoot, you're just tired and bored. So yeah, we tried a few other things.
Nice. Were there things that didn't work out at all? That you just didn't, that you tried and failed?
Sure. But I mean, ultimately, at least with the magazine thing, we tried other iterations on it where we took the mag and put it near the gun and it just sucked it out of your hand. And while that was okay, we ended up going with what essentially is the KF2 solution, where you, as you're shooting, your last shot will auto-reload the gun, or you can cancel at any time and reload whenever you want by just pressing a button.
Yeah, when we tried the more complicated methods, it really brought the pacing of the game down. And Killing Floor has always been a very action-oriented game. And when we didn't have the very complicated reload, we were having these fun moments where we're dual-wielding weapons, or you're shooting a pistol over here and you throw it over there, and it was, you felt like an action hero. And then as soon as we added those complicated methods, it just wasn't, the pace just ground to a halt. That doesn't mean that that's a bad thing if you're making a tactical shooter or something like that. That could be a fun way to go, but in an action game, it wasn't as good.
For us, it sucked the intensity out of it and just made people frustrated.
Neo doesn't reload.
No, or at least you don't see him reload, and when he does, he looks like a badass. So.
Nice. So most of your games are multiplayer. That sort of gives them an unlimited playtime. How did you plan for volume of content in Incursion's single player and co-op modes?
Yeah, we started with a target of 4 to 6 hours. We felt like a lot of the early experiences were 2 to 3 hours, so we thought, let's double that, and that'll be a good full game. And we developed our first level, Farmhouse, our first mission, and then we started having people play it. And people were taking about an hour and a half, and when we multiplied that times the number of missions that we had with training and everything else, we're like, wow, we're at 6 or 8 hours. So we went on, we developed the rest of the game, and then close to launch, we started having more experienced people play the game and realized that something had changed over time. Early on in VR, people were really, they were awed not necessarily by your game, but by VR in general. They would be there, you know, in our farmhouse map, and they're looking at the stars, and they're looking at the trees, and they're just in awe of being there, being and having the presence of VR. But as players got more experienced, because we had been testing with inexperienced people that hadn't played a lot of VR, they were going through the game about twice as fast. Well, not quite twice as fast, but considerably faster. Mm-hmm. So in the end, we discovered that we had 4 to 6 hours of gameplay, which was still on our target, but we really, after we released the game, we saw that we really need something a little bit more. If somebody was making just a single-player game, we would probably recommend, you know, maybe 6 or 8 hours. I mean, you know, every game's going to be a little bit different, but people seem to want still just a little bit more. or having a much more replayable game mode.
So I mean, one of the things that Tripwire is most known for is weapon design, because it seems you like guns.
You could say that.
So let's talk about that. Weapons must have taken a lot of work to get right. So given the sort of super hardcore simulation style of Tripwire shooters, what did you do to make Incursion weapons feel like Tripwire weapons?
Well, I mean, there was a lot of stuff that we knew wouldn't help, right? We took and made sure that the core had to be fun, that pull out the gun, point it, aim it, and shoot it all needed to be solid. If it didn't have the recoil, if it was non-existent, it just wouldn't be enjoyable. If the sound wasn't there, like if the gun sounded like a stapler, it wouldn't be good. And if the impact effect and the impact that the player felt, the feedback just wasn't great, then we would know right away that something was wrong.
So that's sort of the context, like, but what was the work of getting the weapons to feel good?
Yeah, we've had a lot of experience making video game guns feel good, where Tripwire is kind of well known for that. And when we tried to apply that experience in VR, what we found is some of the experience we had was not applicable at all, and some of it really needed to be adapted to VR. One of the first things we started working on was camera shake. Now the common knowledge at the time was just don't do camera shake, because camera shake will make people motion sick.
It's bad. True.
Camera shake's bad, avoid it. But we're kind of stubborn, so we decided, no, we're going to try to make this work, because camera shake in a traditional shooter is part of what makes the gun feel powerful when you fire it. It gives you this feeling that you're firing something with some power, with some oomph. And so we did a lot of experimentation. I jokingly say that I sacrificed my stomach on the altar of having good feeling weapons, because I tried everything. I tried all kinds of camera shake to find out what would not make me sick, and I'm fairly susceptible. So here are the takeaways. Here's what we learned. Having some camera shake where it goes forward and back, especially fairly quickly, and if it's short, people are pretty comfortable with that. Also having some camera shake that is where you roll the camera really fast, it has to feel like a shake. People are comfortable with that as well. You don't want it to feel like a boat on the ocean. A boat on the ocean is bad in VR.
That's surprising, because usually like roll is the worst of all the orientations that you could do to a player.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It has to be very high frequency. It has to be a very quick jarring, and it can't last too long. Those two work pretty well. Pitch or up and down movement, you can use really sparingly, but it has to be short, and you should use it on a weapon that fires slowly. Like we use it a little bit on our shotgun, but if you use it on something like an assault rifle and the camera's shaking like this, that doesn't feel good. Mm-hmm. We also found out, one of the things that we saw was completely avoid yaw, or left and right. Left and right, no matter what we tried with left and right, that made everyone particularly uncomfortable. Another thing I would recommend if you're going to try camera shake, start with very, very tiny numbers. I made the mistake of not doing that, and I think my initial camera shake was about 25 feet, and the camera was moving clear across the room, and I just had to rip the headset off and lay down for a little bit. So start with really, really small numbers. And one of the great things was we were able to validate this system. First, we did about 50 people in the studio tried it, and nobody got motion sick. And then we brought in focus testers, and nobody got motion sick. And then since we've released the game, no one has gotten motion sick. So it's one of those things that you really say about VR. Even though people will say, don't do this, sometimes you should do that. Sometimes you should try and experiment. Even if people say don't do it, you might find a different way, or you might find a method that allows you to do things that people think that you can't do.
So after 25 feet of camera shake, do you have any tips for dealing with nausea? How do you not throw up at work? Just suffer for your craft?
Yeah, I mean, we have a couch that, that's the solution is go lay on the couch for a little while till you feel better.
Yeah.
We stock ginger beer when we receive, early demos that need comfort work.
So Chris, we've been working together in VR for a while. Some of us spent about 2 months motion sick.
Yeah.
Tell developers that in the beginning.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah. To drink ginger beer.
Ginger beer. Tell us that in the beginning. Absolutely. Write that down.
Not the camera moves.
Not the camera moves.
All right. So related to weapons, when you hold them in VR, unlike with a monitor shooter. You've got to actually hold them in your hands. So how do you deal with the fact that not everyone is a good shot?
Yeah, so we discovered, pretty quick that not everyone is good at lining something up with their hands. And a lot of the people around the office we go to gun ranges and things like that. We're average shooters. And so we were kind of our initial test group. But as we started testing with more people, we started to see that hey, not everyone is getting this instantly. They're used to playing a game on a traditional flat screen with a crosshair, put the crosshair on the monster, push the mouse, and the creatures die. So we really had to, we really tuned the game more for newer players, but the newer players, part of what we saw with that is very experienced core VR players, the game was a little too easy. So we really, we're looking at things for the future to address that.
So is there anything in the game now or anything you're building to deal with pro players?
Yeah, so one of our biggest issues, as you said, was we had a lot of new to VR players come in and test the game, and we realized pretty quickly after we released that, wow, we made this a little too easy for the finished product. And we really wanted to make something that was more challenging. So we are adding a harder difficulty mode in the new update. And it's pretty different. The AI companion that usually helps the player, leads them through or saves them, doesn't do that. So the player's on their own. We the enemies have a chance to come into the world already angered and sprint at the player. We cut health and ammo. We really just try to test them and make the player have a much more difficult time.
Yeah, really want to give them a challenge. Just a quick thought too on the weapons you were asking about. Another couple of things that we had to do with weapons was address things like recoil. In a traditional on-screen shooter, a traditional flat-screen shooter, the recoil, you do really significant animated recoil to make the weapons feel powerful. But one of the issues in VR is if you're on screen or if the rendered weapon that you see is in a significantly different position to where your hand is, it breaks that feeling of presence. You no longer feel like you're really holding the gun. So we had to do a lot of work to make that feel good. And the way that we solved that was creating a procedural recoil system, which essentially the game would, rather than an animator hand animating the recoil path for the weapon, we could programmatically generate that. When we started doing that, we found that worked really well because we could turn those numbers up and down to find just the place where the gun could move some without it breaking the presence.
Instead of going back to Maya.
Yes, instead of going back to Maya or 3ds Max or Motion Builder. But we also found it felt a little robotic. So we did develop a system where we put some nuanced shake, a little bit of motion in that was hand animated, but then designers could dial in that recoil and make sure that the weapon felt really good.
So when the weapon recoils, is the implementation that like sort of the hand and the gun move to offset from the actual track position, or is it just the gun? Or?
The hand and the gun move.
Okay, but it's like a short procedural animation.
Yes, and the other benefit of that, one of the things that we discovered was that in VR, when you're using weapons, in a traditional FPS, if you need to interrupt an action, and let's say you're shooting, and then you press the reload button, and the gun finishes recoiling, and then the reload animation starts. That is fine. Players don't really notice that. But if that happens in VR, they feel like I pushed the button and nothing is happening. This gun is in my hand. It really needs to start reloading right now. So with the procedural system, we were able to, for example, continue the recoil while the reload animation would start. So we were able to mix things together that we couldn't with a traditional system.
Nice. All right, so let's talk about some of the tech challenges you face in making Incursion. So I imagine you had a head start from years of shooter development, but some things must have been new and different in VR. So what about sound? It's sort of important in all games, but VR has unique tech and design challenges because of the fact that it has sort of head tracking and the users inside of it. What did you find working on sound for Incursion?
Yeah, sound made a huge difference. We had people come in and play, and you would see this frustration when something would come up behind them, and it would scare them out of nowhere, or they just didn't feel like I knew that was coming, or I couldn't sense that around me. So we definitely, the 3D audio made a huge difference when we started to track the enemies throughout the world. We also had a problem where the players never knew where their teammate was. So
Because they were teleporting.
yeah, correct. So in a normal game, you would hear footsteps, right, going around you. Whereas in this, it's like, click, I'm now 30 feet away from you. So John had a good idea to add a sound at the starting location and then one at the ending location in, spatialized. And that worked out really well because you would hear the start of the guy starting to teleport, and then, back to your left now, that if I turn around, my partner's gonna be there.
Nice.
So that made a really big difference. Some other stuff, surprisingly not spatializing headshots is, well, you spatialize them, but just not as much. It's not as dramatic. A lot of games have really impactful sound for when you blow up a head. In Killing Floor 2.
Including Killing Floor 2?
Yeah, it's like a crack and a splat, and it's so obvious. It's kind of like
A lot of meat noises.
it's the helmet ting from any World War II game, when you get a headshot or something. It really gives the player the sense that, oh, I did something, or I understand that something has happened. So in one of our new game modes, Holdout, we had to crank that up, and the less spatialization, the better, because it does play a core part of linking and chaining headshots together for higher scores and stuff. But yeah, sound is huge. Weapons.
Yeah. Spatialization is
Yeah.
super, super important in VR. Knowing that the monster's coming from over here or over there. So they're not, people like a little bit of scared, but they want to feel like, they don't want to ever feel like the game tricked them, right? Yeah. They don't want to feel like, how did this monster get behind me? They want to know, if I'm using my faculties, if I'm using my hearing, I can really listen, and oh, there's a monster, but I know, and I can turn around.
They want to be horrified fair and square.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
right. Fair and square horrified.
Yeah, they don't want to be cheated into their horror.
All right, so Incursion is a co-op game. So you have had networking and multiplayer in all your previous titles, but I imagine VR must have presented some novel challenges. What did you run into implementing co-op?
So we ran into a few major things that we did find solutions for. One of the first ones, we had this idea early on that, let's say John is battling some enemies, and all of a sudden he runs out of ammo and starts screaming at me over VoIP like, I'm out of ammo, and I want to be able to throw him my gun, him accurately be able to grab it, and then start shooting like, just seamless. But what we found is the out-of-the-box physics when working with replication, like if it's a sphere, it's great. It's very predictable. Anything other than that, like an AK-47 or something, no, right out the window. Like for the server, it's here, and for the client, it's way over there by the time it's bounced 36 times if you miss the throw or whatever. So what we ended up doing is correcting the server, updates the client's physics throughout the air while it's in flight and kind of nudges it in the right direction. And then once it hits the ground, it reorients itself to make sure that they're always in the same place for both players. Something else that we really had to struggle with, you wouldn't think this would be that big of a deal, but in VR, as soon as you point and grab, something goes in your hand, right? So the client, with any network lag whatsoever, it was instantly perceivable that, oh, that didn't happen. It didn't happen at the right time. So what we ended up doing is giving the client authority to be able to pick anything up whenever they wanted. And if the server at the same time was grabbing that thing and the server beat them to the punch, it would just force drop on the client. But a system like that's really useful because you want both of your players to feel like what they're doing in the world is instantaneous. It's as fast as it can possibly be. And in a traditional game, you wouldn't really notice that network lag, but in VR, you really notice it.
Yeah, we noticed that right away, especially with the hands, because there wasn't an out-of-the-box solution for network hands in a VR shooter when we started. So we started working with it. We noticed you would move your hand, and then your real hand, and then your rendered hand would follow it, and that's, once again, an instant presence breaker. So we had to create a system that was different than your standard client-server system. Usually in a client-server system, the server is authoritative, and it tells the clients where the thing is, and it sends the data over the network to tell them. But we had to have the player's hands tell the server where their hands were at, and then the server would tell the other player where their hands were at. And that allowed them to instantly move and be right where they needed to be. And we had to add some smoothing in so that so they wouldn't look jerky over the network. But like Leland mentioned, in VR, you're in a traditional shooter, you're able to kind of mask that lag a little bit. People just, they don't notice if they walk up to a box and they press their use button and it gets picked up 50 milliseconds later. But in VR, that 50 milliseconds feels like an eternity. So you have to make sure that you make everything snappy and simulate things on clients that you wouldn't normally have to do in a traditional FPS.
Nice.
Yeah, pretty much it was described to me as the client has authority over everything until they don't. So as long as you approach it with that mentality, and then just make sure the server's always checking, you should be all right.
And it helps you in co-op, like
Yeah.
You're not trying to blow your friend's head off. You're trying to both blow zombie heads off.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
So, I mean, going back to sort of the experience you brought in from previous games, you've shipped some single-player content before, but this is your first product with a full campaign. So what did you learn making narrative content in VR?
Yeah, a lot. One of the main things was players can look anywhere. They can do anything. You're trying to tell them this grand story, and they're like off in the corner, throwing their gun against a wall, or they're shooting the thing that is trying to tell them the story.
Throwing is great in VR.
Yeah, or they're just not paying attention at all. And
Climbing under a desk, or
yeah, or
who knows
just like,
what.
I wonder if I could fit in here, or what's in this garbage can out of nowhere, and you don't know how to solve that problem. So we did a few things to try to help it. We didn't want to take control of the camera. We didn't want to stick someone in a cutscene. That seemed kind of a jerk move. So really, we have an AI companion that's like a robot that hovers near you, and it delivers most of the main story transmissions from our second character, Emma, who is kind of your guide, your partner throughout this simulation that you're in. And everything's going wrong, and she seems to be the only one that cares. So the robot companion node delivers you the transmissions and will follow you and update its location with you. But if you don't want to pay attention, or you want to shoot him in the face,
First thing I
or
did.
punch him, or stick him with a knife.
that's what everybody does.
Everybody
as soon as
stuck
they
him
see
with
him,
a
they're
knife.
like, can I break it? And that's fine. Because the story's still being delivered. It's updating with your location. So if you move around, it'll kind of correct itself. And to some it may not be the thing that they want, but at least we're delivering them the bulk of the main narrative through that. Another character we have, which is our link to Killing Floor 2, is Mr. Foster. He is a pretty popular character in the Killing Floor universe. And with him, we wanted to do the big beat story points. So we wanted the player, when they were talking to Foster, we kind of needed them to look at him at least, or at least pay attention. So we scaled his head up real giant. We pull the player outside of their current location, stick them in an unknown environment. So they're kind of shocked once they're there. And then he's this like giant thing, Wizard of Oz style, in front of you. And we figured as long as they get his story at that point, we've kind of, they're caught up, right? Like what he says are the big beats, and we hope that, okay, you understand what's happening up until this point.
And I know you guys put some thought into the design of the player's character as part of this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we wanted to do was to make sure that the player felt like they were in the story. Not that as I'm playing somebody else, but that I am in the story. So we very purposely made sure that the character, when they look at their body or when they look at the other character, they're all gender neutral, and they never speak.
Yeah.
Even when they're getting hurt, they make pain sounds, but they're very gender neutral. So people will always feel like they're in the game, not I'm playing another character.
Yeah, it was always really hard for me to play a VR game where I was somebody else and they were speaking. And I'm like, I'm not talking. I'm not saying this to this thing. Or like, I don't breathe like that. That's creeping me out. So yeah, we wanted to make sure that at least when you played this game, it felt like you were the one in the simulation. And then there was one more way. So there's another character that nobody, or it's not nobody, but I don't know how many people really realized this was such a big character in the game, and that was this character Colin, who was
It's a secret.
It's not really a secret, and so he was referenced.
Not anymore.
Yeah, so he was referenced a lot by Mr. Foster and by Emma, our other two main characters, and he was our way to deliver the story through the world itself instead of just through dialogue. If you look around enough, you'll find clues, and he'll kind of have scribblings on the wall or highlight certain items that you may want to use. And yeah, we just really we figured if we could get them somewhat paying attention to the main narrative, guaranteed to get the big beats, and then the explorer type is going to find the rest of the clues and hints, that we've delivered the story as best as we can without shoving it down their throat.
Sure. So you mentioned Foster. So I mean, he's a giant head. Scale is one of the things that is sort of very different in VR than in traditional games. You can sort of get away with fudging the size of things in a traditional game that you can't do in VR, where you have stereo vision, you're moving your body around, and you can sort of tell how big things are. How did you do with scale in making Incursion?
So we had a pretty big goal to reuse a lot of assets from Killing Floor 2. Going into it with such a small team, we knew we needed to make every effort to get the most out of our content. And it didn't work out as well as we'd hoped. You know, a lot of that stuff was made for different scenarios. There's one situation that I always like to tell people because they ask that same question. And so we have our farmhouse level, and there's a couch right in the living room. And I put the couch in, and I scaled it, and I'm like, dude, this is it. Looks just like my couch. Someone else comes in, and they're like, that's too big. My couch is smaller. And then you start to realize that everyone in VR, much different than a traditional game, looks at objects in that game as compared to things that they personally have. Or like their end table is this high, so this one doesn't feel right. Or their bed is this high, so this one doesn't feel right. And yeah, so eventually we just waited till someone gave up, and then we made the couch that size. Like everyone that kept trying to change it, like people just fell off over time. And
So not everyone is just going to IKEA with the same couch? You have like a wide variety of furniture in the studio?
Sort of, pretty much.
So you also did a bunch of sort of experiments with scale, like you played with scale throughout the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, in VR, one of the most interesting and dramatic things that you can do is to play with scale. Because if you're going to make something that looks real, obviously it has to be the right size and it has to feel real. Mm-hmm. But in VR, you can also play with scale and do things that kind of mess with people's heads. You know, one of the things we already mentioned was a giant Mr. Foster head. Yeah. You know, we could have just made that character be a person standing there talking to you. But, you know, Leland and his team had the idea of, let's make this a giant Wizard of Oz, you know, this head is, 20 feet across. Mm-hmm. And that's really freaky. Watching people play for the first time, they see this giant head in front of them, and they're kind of freaking out. Yeah. We also did, we scaled some of the boss characters up about a foot taller than they are in Killing Floor, because we wanted them to be even scarier, because seeing a giant hulking monster in front of you it's such a visceral, you picture somebody the size of the Incredible Hulk, and they're in front of you, and they're trying to bash you, and they're so huge, it's really freaky. And then for the final battle in the game, we made a boss battle where the boss was multiple stories tall. It was just huge, and you're looking up this terrifying creature with mouths and tentacles, and then you have to realize that you have to scale a catwalk to get up to the top, and you're 3 stories up, and we have you look over the ledge. We play with some of the fears of heights, and we have you do one of the hardest things in VR, which is take a step and walk out onto invisibility, like an invisible platform, like the leap of faith, and just pushing the boundaries of the things that people's brains tell them just aren't right could really make dramatic, exciting moments in VR.
So you enjoy screwing with people?
We do enjoy messing with people's heads.
Nice. So now you've shipped, Killing Floor Incursion is out. Often 90% of the pain of making a game is the last 10%. So what did you learn in finishing Killing Floor?
QA is super important. which is every game.
Really?
But a different kind of QA.
A different kind of QA. So one of the things that was really funny, and at least this is one story, we had this bug where we had a tester who, without fail, could make it so a boss on a certain level did not spawn. And we're like, everyone tried to reproduce this bug. I tried it, all the programmers tried it, we tried it on different computers. This dude could go to anyone's computer and make it happen. And we're like, there's no way, like, what is he doing? And then finally, we asked him, okay, stand up. And he stood up and the boss spawned. And then we realized it's because he sat like this all the time, that his collision capsule was poking through the floor and triggering an encounter previous to that boss area that was still activated. And after that, we were just like, how do we test this? How do you solve for this? Like, anything can go wrong no matter what. So one of our programmers then prompted our testers to play the entire game laying down, just to make sure that, like, nothing weird happened.
Lay on the floor and play the game.
Exactly.
Nap Fridays.
Yeah, so that girl, like, I felt bad, but she had to play, like, laying down for like 5 hours. And then we had another one where just a guy came in and he was a blind tester and he was just really tall. And all of a sudden, dudes started spawning above him and they were like clipping through walls. And we're like, how is this even happening? Like, we've never seen any of these bugs before. And really, it all stems from just the size of the person makes a huge difference, you know?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things that we learned and that we encourage everybody who's making a VR game, you're going to have to test for this, is for the first time ever, physicality matters. It's not, you know, whether somebody's taller or not as tall, whether, you know, even posture matters. Like, we had the one tester that plays like this.
Yeah.
You're going to have to test so many different scenarios that you wouldn't have had to test in the past. So it was an important lesson to learn.
Yeah, and we even had, we would watch streams and stuff after we launched, and the testers would end up trying to mimic their exact sensor setup, and then, you know, okay, the center of their room is there, we need to play the whole game over there, and just try to recreate some of the weird stuff that we had seen that, like, you couldn't prepare for that.
Yeah, and you know, that's one of the things, you know, we support the 360-degree tracking.
Yep.
You're going to see when you do that people will play in a much larger room than recommended.
Yeah.
So, you know, we tested, you know, a recommended size room, but players will walk, you know, 15 feet away from the center of their room.
And then play the whole game from that location.
Yeah. So you need to test for those things.
Yeah.
So add posture to your QA hiring list.
Yes.
Pretty much.
Posture, height.
Yeah. Well, you want them to be able to, you know, mimic all postures.
Oh, nice.
They have to be able to
Flexibility.
slouch perfectly and then play the whole game like this and just see if that makes any difference, if they're triggering.
Side chair testing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we have some video of bugs you found in QA, if you want to just tell us what we're seeing.
Yeah, so we call this one, they all float down here, Billy. Just some, you know, initial ragdoll physics problems. This one was funny. In the final level of the game, a bunch of the monsters were disappearing. We couldn't find out where they were going. And then we found them. They were making a cheerleader pyramid in the credits room. Because that's what monsters do when they're not fighting you. Now, this was a fun glitch when we started working on the head gore. You shoot a monster, its head pops off. But we forgot to make it not keep popping off.
Yeah.
So, of course, what do? You keep shooting and keep shooting. And keep shooting.
I don't know why you didn't ship this.
I know, we should have shipped this.
Ship it.
Dev hacks. I like it.
Nice. All right. So we are almost out of time. We're going to do some Q&A from the audience at the end. But John, I want to let you talk about your upcoming major update holdout. You want to briefly describe what you're doing in the update and why?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we mentioned was we really wish that we had a, on top of our story campaign, a really replayable, a much more replayable multiplayer mode. So we got a lot of that feedback as well after we shipped, so that's exactly what we've done. We've created this mode called Holdout. It is a over-the-top horde mode. You know, you and a teammate try to survive as long as you can. There's going to be leaderboards, so you can try to be the person that survives the longest in the world. You know, it's got crazy power-ups, you know, some that steal life from the enemies. One that is my personal favorite, where you're punching monsters and they're flying off into space, and it's one-punch kill. A lot of fun.
All right, let's see it.
Power-up system online. Headshot. New weapon. Engine of destruction. Headshot. Kill target.
Yay.
Woohoo!